Karen glared at the young couple seated across the cafe, her piercing eyes locked onto their every move. She couldn't help but scoff at their casual laughter and affectionate gestures. How dare they disturb her peaceful morning with their obnoxious display of happiness? Sipping her overpriced lie, Karen continued to glower, hoping her intense stare would make them uncomfortable enough to leave. But the couple remained oblivious, lost in their own little world. "Look at them," Karen muttered under her breath, her fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. Typical millennials, taking up space and drawing attention to themselves. Don't they know this isn't their living room? As the minutes ticked by, Karen's irritation only grew. She shifted in her chair, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, desperate for some kind of reaction from the blissfully unaware couple. Finally, unable to contain her outrage any longer, she slammed her mug down on the table, drawing curious glances from the other patrons. Marching over to their table, Karen loomed over the couple, her face twisted in a menacing scowl. "Excuse me," she snapped, "but do you two mind keeping it down? Some of us are trying to enjoy a peaceful morning without your constant giggling. NPA." The young woman looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're not being disruptive. We're just having a normal conversation." "Normal?" Karen scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "There's nothing normal about the way you two are behaving. This is a public space, not your personal playground. Have some respect for the rest of us." The young man, sensing the situation escalating, tried to intervene. "Look, we're not trying to bother anyone. If we're being too loud, we can keep it down. There's no need to." "Too loud?" Karen interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "That's not the issue here, young man. The issue is your complete disregard for common decency and—" "Excuse me, ma'am," a barista interrupted, approaching the confrontation with a concerned expression. "Is there a problem here?" Karen turned her attention to the barista, her lips curling into a tight-lipped smile. "Yes, as a matter of fact, there is a problem. These two," she gestured angrily at the couple, "are disrupting the entire cafe with their obnoxious behavior, and I'd like you to do something about it." The barista glanced at the couple, who appeared visibly uncomfortable, but not particularly rowdy. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see any major disturbance here. If you'd like, we can find you a quieter spot to enjoy your coffee, but I can't ask these customers to leave simply for having a conversation." Karen's face flushed with indignation. "Are you kidding me? This is unacceptable. I demand that you remove them from the premises immediately." The barista held up a hand, trying to defuse the situation. "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am. If you continue to disrupt the other customers, I may have to ask you to leave instead." Fuming, Karen glared at the barista, then turned her attention back to the couple, who were now staring at her with a mixture of confusion and concern. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming out of the cafe, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. As Karen stalked out of the cafe, her blood boiling with rage, she couldn't believe the audacity of the barista and that disrespectful young couple. How dare they challenge her and dismiss her concerns so casually? Didn't they understand that she was the aggrieved party here, the victim of their shameless public display? Fuming, Karen hurried to her car, her mind racing with thoughts of how to get back at them. She knew she couldn't let this slide. Her reputation and sense of entitlement were at stake. As she slammed the car door shut, an idea struck her. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report a disturbance at the Cafe Mocha on Main Street," she said in a terse, urgent tone. "There's a couple here causing a scene and refusing to leave, despite my complaints. I'm concerned for the safety of the other customers." The 911 operator listened patiently, then replied, "Okay, ma'am. I've dispatched a patrol car to the location. Can you provide any additional details about the situation?" "Well, these two young people were being completely inappropriate and disruptive," Karen explained, her voice dripping with disdain. They were laughing and carrying on, completely disregarding the other customers. And when I tried to address the issue, the barista refused to do anything about it. "I see," the operator responded. "And do you have any concerns for your own safety, or that of the other customers?" "Absolutely. I'm worried that this situation could escalate, and the staff here seems unwilling to handle it properly," Karen insisted, her tone laced with faint concern. "Please, you have to send someone right away." "All right, ma'am. The officers are on their way." "Try to remain calm and avoid further confrontation until they arrive," the operator advised. "Oh, I'll do my best," Karen replied, a hint of smugness creeping into her voice. Hanging up the phone, she settled back into her seat, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "That'll teach those inconsiderate brats a lesson," she muttered to herself. Sure enough, within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the air, and 2 police officers strode into the cafe. Karen watched eagerly as they approached the unsuspecting couple, who looked bewildered and slightly intimidated by the sudden arrival of the law enforcement. But as the officers began questioning the couple, Karen's smug expression quickly turned to one of dismay. The barista, who had been keeping a watchful eye on the situation, stepped forward and explained what had actually transpired, how Karen had confronted the couple over their disruptive behavior, and how the staff had tried to de-escalate the situation. Karen's stomach dropped as the officers turned their attention to her, their faces etched with disapproval. "Ma'am, it seems you were the one causing the disturbance here," one of the officers said sternly. "We're going to have to issue you a warning for filing a false report and disturbing the peace. I'd suggest you leave the premises and cool off before you end up in further trouble." Cheeks burning with humiliation, Karen could only nod mutely as the officers escorted her out of the cafe, the eyes of the other patrons burning into her back. As she slid into her car, she let out a frustrated scream, realizing that her plan for revenge had spectacularly backfired. As Karen sat in her car, seething with anger and humiliation, she couldn't believe how horribly her plan had gone awry. The police officer's dismissive treatment and the barista's betrayal had left her feeling utterly powerless and embarrassed. "How dare they?" she fumed, pounding her fist against the steering wheel. "I was the one wronged here, and they had the nerve to turn it around on me." Karen's sense of entitlement had been shattered, and she found herself struggling to come to terms with the fact that her actions had consequences. For once, her demands had not been met, and the realization that she couldn't always get her way was a bitter pill to swallow. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Karen took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She knew she couldn't stay in the car forever. She had to figure out a way to salvage her wounded pride and regain a semblance of control over the situation. After a few minutes, an idea began to take shape in her mind. Maybe she couldn't get the police to remove the offending couple, but there had to be something else she could do to get back at them. A sly smile spread across her face as a plan began to formulate. Pulling out her phone, Karen quickly typed out a scathing Yelp review of the cafe, detailing her version of the events and accusing the staff of incompetence and bias. She knew that negative online reviews could be incredibly damaging to a business, and she took a perverse satisfaction in hitting submit, imagining the horror on the manager's face when they read her scathing words. "That'll teach them to disrespect me," she muttered, a sense of vindication washing over her. No one makes a fool of Karen Wilkins and gets away with it. Feeling a little better, Karen started her car and pulled out of the parking lot, already plotting her next move. If the cafe refused to take her seriously, then she would have to find other ways to make them pay for their insolence. Perhaps she could file a formal complaint with the city or even contact the local news outlets. Anything to ensure that her side of the story was heard and that those responsible were held accountable. As she drove, Karen's mind raced with possibilities, each one more outrageous than the last. She was determined to emerge from this situation as the victor, no matter what it took. After all, she was Karen Wilkins, and she refused to be pushed around by a bunch of entitled millennials and their spineless enablers. Little did she know, however, that her escalating campaign for retribution was about to take an unexpected and potentially disastrous turn. Over the next few days, Karen's campaign to punish the cafe and the young couple intensified. Fueled by her wounded ego and a deep-seated sense of entitlement, she became a one-woman wrecking ball, determined to make everyone pay for the humiliation she had endured. First, she filed a formal complaint with the city's business licensing department, alleging that the cafe was operating in violation of various health and safety codes. She even went so far as to claim that the couple had been openly consuming illegal drugs on the premises in a blatant attempt to have the establishment shut down. To her dismay, the city inspectors found no evidence to support her allegations, but that didn't deter Karen in the slightest. She then turned her attention to online review sites, bombarding them with scathing one-star reviews that painted the cafe and its staff as incompetent, rude, and unfit to serve the public. "This place is an absolute disgrace," she ranted in one particularly vitriolic post. "The staff is utterly clueless, and they clearly have no respect for their customers. I witnessed a horrific display of unprofessional behavior, and the owners should be ashamed of themselves for allowing such a travesty to occur." Karen's relentless campaign quickly caught the attention of the cafe's management, who were baffled by the sudden onslaught of negative reviews. Desperate to protect their reputation, they reached out to the local media, hoping to shed some light on the situation and clear their name. It wasn't long before the story made its way to the evening news, with a local reporter painting a sympathetic picture of the cafe's plight and the seemingly unstable customer who was intent on destroying their business. As Karen watched the news segment unfold, her face turned beet red with fury. "How dare they make me out to be the villain?" she hissed, her hands clenching into fists. "I'm the one who was wronged here, and they're making me look like some kind of crazy person." Fuming, Karen decided to take her crusade to the next level. Convinced that the cafe was conspiring against her, she began making frequent visits to the establishment, using every opportunity to confront the staff and loudly air her grievances. "You think you can just sweep this under the rug, don't you?" she would shout, drawing curious stares from the other customers. "Well, I'm not going anywhere until you make this right." The baristas and managers, growing increasingly weary of Karen's disruptive behavior, tried their best to placate her, but their attempts only seemed to further enrage the irate woman. Desperate to restore a sense of calm and normalcy to their business, they eventually called the police, hoping that the authorities could convince Karen to leave. As the officers arrived on the scene, Karen's eyes widened with a mix of triumph and trepidation. This was her chance to finally get the justice she felt she deserved. But deep down, she couldn't shake the lingering fear that her crusade might have gone too far. As the police officers approached Karen, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She had been eagerly awaiting this moment, convinced that the authorities would finally recognize the injustice she had endured and come to her defense. "Ma'am, we've received several complaints about your behavior here," one of the officers said sternly. "The management has asked us to remove you from the premises if you refuse to leave peacefully." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she straightened her posture, determined to project an air of righteous indignation. "Remove me," she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm the one who called you here in the first place. These people," she gestured wildly toward the cafe staff, "have been harassing me and refusing to address my very legitimate concerns." The officers exchanged a weary glance, having clearly dealt with similar situations in the past. "Ma'am, we've already spoken to the staff, and they've informed us that you've been the one causing a disturbance. Unless you have concrete evidence of wrongdoing, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Karen's jaw dropped, and for a moment, she was rendered speechless. How dare they side with the cafe against her? Didn't they understand the gravity of the situation and the injustice she had endured? "Concrete evidence," she sputtered, her eyes wild with desperation. I've given you more than enough evidence. I've filed complaints, written scathing reviews, and tried to get this place shut down, and you're telling me that's not enough." One of the officers held up a hand, silencing her tirade. "Ma'am, we understand you're upset, but that kind of behavior is not acceptable. If you continue to disrupt the business, we'll have no choice but to arrest you for disturbing the peace." Karen's face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. "Arrest me," she shrieked, drawing the attention of the other patrons. "You can't be serious. I'm the victim here, and you're threatening to arrest me." The officers remained steadfast, their expressions unwavering. "Ma'am, we're giving you one last chance to leave peacefully. If you refuse, we'll be forced to take you into custody." Realizing that her grand plan for retribution was unraveling before her eyes, Karen felt a surge of desperation. She couldn't let them win, not after everything she'd done. Mustering all of her remaining resolve, she straightened her shoulders and stared defiantly at the officers. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. You'll all hear from my lawyer, and I swear, I'll make sure this place is shut down for good." The officers exchanged a weary glance, then moved to apprehend Karen, who began shrieking and struggling against their grip. As she was led away in handcuffs, Karen knew that her crusade had taken a dangerous turn, but her wounded pride refused to let her back down. Little did she know, the consequences of her actions were about to spiral far beyond anything she could have imagined. As Karen sat in the back of the police cruiser, her wrists cuffed behind her back, the reality of her situation began to sink in. What had started as a seemingly righteous crusade to defend her honor had spiraled completely out of control, and now she found herself facing the very real consequences of her actions. The ride to the police station was a tense and uncomfortable one, with Karen alternating between futile pleas for leniency and defiant declarations of her innocence. But the officers remained unmoved, their expressions weary and unsympathetic. When they arrived at the station, Karen was processed and booked on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Despite her insistence that she was the true victim, the officers had seen enough of her erratic behavior to know that she posed a genuine threat to the peace and safety of the community. As she sat in a holding cell, waiting to be arraigned, Karen's mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. She was angry, humiliated, and utterly bewildered by how the situation had unfolded. Hadn't she been the one wronged? Hadn't she been the one fighting for justice? But as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of her predicament set in, Karen began to feel a sinking sense of dread. She had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate the system and get her way. But this time, her tactics had backfired spectacularly. The thought of facing legal consequences for her actions filled her with a growing sense of panic. When her court date finally arrived, Karen was a nervous wreck. She had hired a high-powered attorney, but even he seemed skeptical of her chances of avoiding a conviction. As she sat in the courtroom, listening to the prosecution's account of her disruptive and aggressive behavior, Karen felt her heart sink. The judge, a stern-faced woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened intently to the arguments on both sides. She then turned her gaze toward Karen, her expression unwavering. "Ms. Wilkins, the court has reviewed the evidence, and we find your actions to be unacceptable and a clear violation of the law. While we understand that you may have felt wronged, your response was disproportionate and put the safety of others at risk." Karen felt her stomach twist into knots as the judge continued. "However, given the lack of any prior criminal record, we are inclined to show leniency. You will be placed on probation for a period of 6 months, during which time you must refrain from any further disruptive or threatening behavior. Failure to comply will result in more severe consequences." As the judge banged her gavel, Karen sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. She had expected to walk away a free woman, vindicated and empowered. Instead, she found herself facing the humiliation of a probationary sentence, a permanent stain on her previously spotless record. As she was led out of the courtroom, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of bitter defeat. Her crusade for justice had backfired spectacularly, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered pride and bruised ego. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. As Karen's legal woes unfolded, the fallout from her reckless actions quickly began to ripple through every aspect of her life. The news of her arrest and conviction had spread like wildfire, and soon her reputation was in tatters. At first, Karen tried to downplay the significance of the incident, telling her friends and colleagues that it was all a misunderstanding and that she was the true victim. But as the details of her behavior emerged, it became increasingly difficult for her to maintain that narrative. One by one, Karen's social circles started to distance themselves from her. Her closest friends, once loyal and supportive, began to question the validity of her claims and express discomfort with her erratic behavior. Even her colleagues at work began to treat her with a newfound wariness, unsure of how to interact with someone whose actions had landed them in legal trouble. To make matters worse, the cafe's management had not taken the allegations against them lightly. Determined to clear their name and protect their business, they launched a relentless PR campaign, painting Karen as a deranged and vindictive individual who had made a mockery of the justice system. The local media, eager to report on the latest twist in the saga, latched onto the story, and soon, Karen's face was splashed across news headlines and social media feeds. The more attention the story garnered, the more damage it did to her reputation, as people began to view her as an unhinged and entitled individual who was willing to go to extreme lengths to get her way. To make matters even worse, the young couple from the cafe, having been thrust into the spotlight against their will, decided to take legal action of their own. They filed a civil lawsuit against Karen, accusing her of defamation, emotional distress, and harassment, and seeking substantial monetary damages. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Karen found herself sinking deeper and deeper into a quagmire of despair. The once confident and unapologetic woman she had been was slowly being eroded, replaced by a shell of her former self, consumed by anxiety and a growing sense of helplessness. Her once thriving career began to suffer as her superiors grew increasingly wary of the negative attention she was bringing to the company. Karen's once comfortable lifestyle began to crumble, as the mounting legal expenses and the loss of income took a significant toll on her financial well-being. With every passing day, it became more and more evident to Karen that the consequences of her actions were far-reaching and devastating. The very reputation she had worked so hard to cultivate was now in tatters, and the prospect of ever regaining her former standing in the community seemed more and more elusive. As she sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window and contemplating the depth of her downfall, Karen couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to salvage the shattered pieces of her once pristine life. As the months passed, Karen's life continued to unravel, a slow-motion train wreck that seemed to have no end in sight. The lawsuit filed by the young cafe couple had been a devastating blow, and the mounting legal fees, combined with the loss of her job, had left her financially crippled. Forced to downsize her lavish lifestyle, Karen found herself living in a cramped apartment, a far cry from the sprawling luxury she had once enjoyed. Gone were the designer clothes, the extravagant vacations, and the constant validation of her peers. In their place, a growing sense of isolation and a profound feeling of failure began to consume her. The once confident and entitled Karen had been reduced to a shadow of her former self, a humbled and broken woman who struggled to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. She had lost everything: her reputation, her financial security, and her sense of self-worth, all because of a misguided crusade to assert her perceived rights. As the weight of her downfall became too much to bear, Karen found herself sinking into a deep depression. She stopped attending her court-mandated counseling sessions, ignoring the terms of her probation, and retreating further and further into a self-imposed exile. The final blow came when the young cafe couple, having won their lawsuit, used the settlement money to open a second location just a few blocks away from the original cafe. The sight of their thriving business, a testament to their resilience in the face of Karen's vindictive attacks, was a bitter pill to swallow. Consumed by a mixture of rage, jealousy, and despair, Karen made one last, desperate attempt to regain a semblance of control. Late one night, she drove to the new cafe, armed with a can of spray paint and a burning desire for revenge. But as she approached the entrance, she found herself confronted by a security guard who had been posted to protect the property. In the ensuing confrontation, Karen's erratic behavior and threats of violence led to her arrest, shattering any remaining hope she had of escaping the downward spiral of her life. As the police officers led her away in handcuffs, Karen finally came to the realization that her actions had irrevocably changed the course of her life. The once powerful and unapologetic woman had been reduced to a broken shell, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unbridled entitlement and the consequences of refusing to take responsibility for one's own actions. In the end, Karen's story served as a stark reminder that even the most seemingly unassailable individuals are not immune to the repercussions of their own choices. Her downfall, a complex web of hubris, delusion, and moral decay, had been of her own making, a bitter reckoning that would haunt her for the rest of her days.